Welcome to the Senior Basketball Analyst. Today we have a couple of topics. We're going to talk about an interview that TNT slash NBA, because he's on NBA TV and TNT. That's all owned by Turner. Uh, we're going to talk about an interview with David Aldridge that he did, and the interviewee, the subject being Danny Ferry. And then we're going to talk about Jimmy Butler and his status with the Bulls. So first, we're going to talk about Danny Ferry. And, to give you some background, Danny Ferry was always this player growing up that you would watch and you'd say, he was like the example when people would say, if I was tall, I could be in the NBA too. Danny Ferry was the guy that you could say, maybe he could be Danny Ferry. Danny Ferry was a lousy NBA player. He was horrible. He was sick. He was one of these 6'10" guys that couldn't really dunk. Like, he could dunk if, no one was around. But if there was any kind of impediment, like a guy a few feet away from him, he couldn't dunk the ball, couldn't shoot. I mean, he could only shoot if he was wide open. He's just a dude that was just this stiff guy that you'd always want. And then he was in the NBA forever. He was always around, and every year you'd think, man, that guy's terrible. He's going to be retired now, right? Nah. And then after his playing career, he was just always around. He always had jobs, and then they make him an executive, and so we get to this controversy, which isn't very controversial, not to me, not from my point of view, but we get to this controversy where, so the inside, at least the inside story that's being relayed to us as NBA fans, is that there was an attempt by an Atlanta Hawks owner to make the controlling ownership look bad. And that's how we ended up with this sale of the Atlanta Hawks to the consortium that includes, at the bottom of it, former NBA star Grant Hill. Well, prior to that sale, what was the impetus for that sale was the leak of a recording that included the then owner making a series of obviously racist comments. Comments about how he wanted the fan base to be whiter. He didn't want black people at the games. And one of his ideas, for example, nonsensical, but one of his ideas was to have fewer black dancers, was one of his ideas. So this gets leaked. It's obviously racist. And what do we mean by racist, by the way? A standard, staple, basic type of racism would be when a group of powerful people get together to talk about an important entity that they have power over, and then start talking about how they're going to discriminate against a group of people based on their race. In this case, black people. Basic. This is basic. So when someone says, well, that's not racist, sure it is. They were talking about how they didn't want black people at the games and figuring out ways to have less black people at the games. That's racism. It's very similar to Donald Sterling. Until the video or the audio came out of him saying these really cartoonish sounding things, no one cared that Donald Sterling had been found in court to be a obvious racist. Donald Sterling, what he was doing was he was participating in housing discrimination, or he was deploying housing discrimination. That's a basic form of racism. That's basic stuff. That's why you can sue and win those cases. It's very hard to win discrimination lawsuits. It's extremely difficult. Donald Sterling got pounded with it because up to the point where he was having his wife go and pose as government agents and harassing black and Mexican tenants. This kind of stuff doesn't get more basic than that. Now, it just so happens that in the United States, not just so happens, because of the way the United States is, most things are owned by white people. When you have these entities, they often discriminate against black people, and they agree to things, and they say these things behind closed doors, and sometimes we hear it. But when people pretend like these things aren't racist, it makes me wonder what would have to happen before you'd say it was racist. Like, not that I need you to say it is, but it just makes me kind of wonder just out of curiosity. Um, it's like how Fox News is bending over backwards to pretend like this, for lack of a better term, this piece of human garbage that killed these poor 9 souls in a church in South Carolina, pretending as though he's not a racist and he's just somebody that has some mental illness or he's some lone crazy person. He's not crazy. He doesn't have any diagnosed mental illness. He's just a garden variety white supremacist, which they kill more people than Islamic terrorists in this country. They're extremely dangerous and extremely powerful. Well, in that vein, here we go again. Danny Ferry says a bunch of things that are obviously racist, and then everybody dives on the grenade for him and is rushing to his rescue. Now, to be clear about what happened to Danny Ferry, not much really did happen to him. Um, Danny Ferry was eventually bought out to the tune of millions of dollars that when I searched, I couldn't find what the exact dollar amount is, and they may not disclose it. Doesn't matter how much it was. It's not like he was really summarily fired or anything, even though he had to have been in breach of contract of some sort because he made the company. Now, he did 2 things. One, he made it impossible for him to do his job with his statements because anybody of African descent at his company, being the Atlanta Hawks, anybody that works there, from people in the back office to people on the court, which most of them are of African descent, they all would find it very troubling to work for an individual that said things like this. Whether they're willing to say it in public or not, because people that tend to say these things tend to have horrible consequences. If you think back, for those of you that can remember, to the 90s when Mahmoud Abdul Rauf refused to stand for the national anthem because he said that the United States was murdering Muslims around the world, which it does. He was absolutely right in what he said. He was very factual. He and they blackballed him. He was very shortly out of the NBA after that. Nobody wants that to happen to them, so it makes it more difficult. This kind of intimidation makes it more difficult to speak up. So people aren't necessarily going to, that work for the Hawks aren't necessarily going to say, yeah, Danny Ferry's a racist, he has to go. They're going to just hope that the organization gets rid of him. But the other thing he did was he made the organization look terrible. And this was on top of the racist statements that the owner um, that was really set up by a co-owner, but it made it altogether, it made the organization look terrible to the point they had to sell the team. This is how bad this was. Don't worry. David Aldridge right there. And you know what? I gotta give our guys, our site designers that I sell the designs, I gotta give them credit because they came to me a long time ago and said, it's David Aldridge. I'm sick of this guy. He needs to go. Now I'm in total agreement. David Aldridge has to go. This puff piece interview that he did for NBA TV is disgraceful. It's disgraceful. He might as well. It's like he's working for Danny Ferry's PR team or something. It's ridiculous. And here's what Danny Ferry did to be or said. Danny Ferry supposedly was reading a scouting report. Now, here's the thing. I'll read you exactly what he was paraphrasing. He's a good guy on the cover, but he's an African. He has a little two-step in him. He equals, says what you like to hear, but behind closed doors, it's cut off on the side, by the way, because I'm reading it, but it's a scanned copy, so it's cut off on the side. This is the copy the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has. And by the way, it's conveniently heavily redacted. All the names are redacted. So with a lot of the players, because this is a long report, or I should say a long collection of reports, a lot of the players I can read. These random scouts, I don't know who any of these people are. And they're really protecting these people because that's the funny thing about this pseudo controversy. Danny Ferry, nobody, as far as I know, no one's saying who wrote this, right? No one's saying. All we know is it came from someone within the Cleveland organization We don't know who it was though, and the date says 2013, 2014. We don't know anything else. But anyway, to continue, the con isn't bad, but it's there, African-like. Storefront looks good, looks great, but there's a black market section in the back. Chicago thought he was good for their culture, but an outlier. Teammates liked him, but he less impact. It must say he had less impact on the locker room than you would think. He complained about things like not enough team jerseys in the team store, or that his bobblehead was last during the year. Has some con and a sense of entitlement. Okay, here's the thing. This is poorly written dribble, and it has nothing to do with whether or not Duke can play basketball. And I don't even see. This is the thing. This is why I don't buy Danny Ferry's explanation. I'm reading this, and it's tough for me to even read it because it sounds so stupid. There's so many things wrong with it that why am I reading this? If I'm in a meeting at work talking about whether or not we should sign a guy, why would I waste anyone's time with this? This is a bunch of nonsense, right? It's ridiculous. But let's do it this way. This is the best way I can illustrate how stupid this is. Let's use a player that we've all killed on the show, Andrew Bogut. I don't like what I know of the things he says after games. I don't like the way he behaves on the court. I don't like, but most importantly, I think he's bad at basketball. I think he stinks. And you know what? His coach thinks he stinks too. That's why he stopped playing. But hey, let's say I'm reading. Let's do this the way I'm gonna pretend I'm Danny Ferry on that same call with ownership, other executives, etc., talking about whether or not we should sign Luol Deng or whether or not we should sign Andrew Bogut. Except obviously, I'm gonna replace African with Australian. Yeah, so we're looking at signing. We're looking at signing Andrew Bogut and his former team, the Bucks. We have a scout report from him. Here's what it says. It says he's a good guy on the cover, but he's an Australian. He has a little two-step. What? Okay, this is stupid. Man, you know what? I'm gonna tell you. This is why Milwaukee's so bad. They have a bunch of racist clowns working as scouts, and they're doing some kind of I don't know, doing some kind of stereotype analysis of the guy instead of rating whether or not he can play basketball or not. What is this nonsense? Wait, guys, hold on. Here, look, this guy goes into it like he's got a real reason for this. Australian like, the storefront looks great, but there's a black market section in the back. What is this idiot talking about? He's talking about the guy too, like he doesn't. Didn't he work for your organization? Haven't you talked to him? Is he? What are you getting at? What, like specifically, what are you getting at? What is he talking about? You see what I mean? You see how absurd that sounds? Like I wouldn't read that. And when you listen to Danny Ferry, he recites this stuff as though it's his own opinion. And he never questions it. He never questions it. Look, here's the thing. You can listen to what Danny Ferry said. You can read this nonsense and see if a non-racist would read it that way. And by the way, how would a racist have said it any differently than Danny Ferry did? While we're giving people immunity for being racist. Because the bottom line is, this is what happened. A bunch of privileged, hyper rich decision makers at a multi-billion-dollar operation got in a meeting at work, and instead of talking about ways to grow their business and ways to make their team better, they started talking about how they didn't like the races of the people in the audience, and they didn't like the ethnic background of one of the players they were potentially going to sign. That's what they did. You can make excuses all day, whether it's David Aldridge or any other self-hating clown. Anybody else, doesn't matter who you are. Or you could be a white supremacist and be making excuses for the guy. But the bottom line is that's what he did. And he got a nice cushy fall. He doesn't have to give up his mansion. He didn't even have to give up his salary, basically. They paid him to go away after he greatly damaged the reputation of the team. Greatly. People do not, by and large, most people, no matter who they are in the United States, don't want to be thinking about nonsense like this when they go to the arena. They don't. And when you say things like that in a meeting at work, not only are you a racist, he's a racist, okay? Now, whether or not you care he's a racist, not really up to me, I don't care. But you can't lie about whether or not he is or isn't. He is. That's why he said what he said. He totally co-signed this nonsense. But he's also a man of very, very, very limited intellect. Because what kind of idiot recites something like that at work? It's just a stupid thing to do. If I'm at a meeting and I got my work stuff on, when I'm in the office, I talk about the work. I don't make a bunch of ridiculous, dumb jokes. I don't talk about people's sexual orientation, their race. I don't talk about that kind of stuff. I talk about the work. And the reason that Danny Ferry was fired from his job is because he made his employer look bad in a very visible, media-oriented organization. He made things very, very uncomfortable for the people for his employees of African descent, and because he's a man of very, very poor judgment. And that's why he was fired. And nobody should feel sorry for him. Nobody. Because if Danny Ferry wasn't a dummy, he'd still be the general manager of the Hawks. They would have kept him even with the ownership change because they had such a successful season last year. They'd have kept him. But no, he wanted to go around and finally I'll say this. Luol Deng, by all accounts, I mean, I couldn't find anything negative about this guy. Here in Chicago, the people I know that have encountered him, whether it be out hanging out at a club late at night or throughout, the day working at the organization, everybody I've ever spoken to that has met and dealt with Luol Deng speaks very highly of him. This guy is a class act. And that's what Danny Ferry had to say about him. That's what he co-signed. It makes you think about what the scumbag in South Carolina said. I almost didn't kill them because they were so nice to me. But he killed them anyway, because that's how a racist thinks. It doesn't matter what kind of person you are. Luol Deng, entire career full of high character, playing hard to the point he played till his legs broke for the Bulls. You have a whole career like that, and an individual like Danny Ferry goes into a meeting and breaks your entire career down to some nonsense stereotype. It's pathetic, and people should have been angry. And instead, what do we get? We get a bunch of pathetic, mealy-mouthed excuses, and it's sad. It's sad that people can't just look at what happened and look at the facts. It's sad. Now, on to something a little more fun. We're going to talk about Jimmy Butler. Man, this is, use Stacey King's nickname. I'm going to use his nickname because it's a fun one. Jimmy G Buckets. The G stands for yes. Jimmy Butler is a max guy, and that's what's going on right now. And what's interesting is the Bulls are playing a fun little game with him. So, and rightfully so. This is what the Bulls should do from a business perspective. I'm going to get to what I think about the business in a moment, but Jimmy Butler is an obvious max player. Really, he's the second best shooting guard in the league. That's right. He's better than Klay Thompson. Jimmy Butler is a lockdown defender. He's a 20-a-game guy. He's a high percentage guy. Can post up, hit the three, can shoot from the mid-range, can drive to the rack and finish in the half court, can finish on the break with authority. He's a really tough cover, and he's almost impossible to deal with because of all the facets that he brings to the table. Just an outstanding young player. We hope he can keep this up. If he can keep this up, he's a Hall of Famer. That's how good he's playing right now. Now it's only been 1 year of him playing at this level with this kind of scoring. So this is one of those things we got to see what he turns into and how his body holds up. But based on the timing of the contract, he's a max guy. So what do the Bulls do? The Bulls pull this trick on him where they offer him a max offer sheet with the maximum years. So what this does is this puts opposing organizations in a situation where, in order for them to pry Jimmy away, they have to give him a certain number of years and money on the contract. This is going to make it more difficult for Jimmy Butler to get a 1 or 2 year deal. Best case scenario for Jimmy Butler, because we all have heard about the new TV deal, which is going to raise the salary cap significantly, which means raising the max contract significantly. What Jimmy Butler wants is he wants a year because he wants to just be an unrestricted free agent next year. But he needs new paper because he makes so little. So he has to opt out. But that makes him or I shouldn't say opt out. He's a restricted free agent. So this puts him in a situation where he can't, he's looking for that, he wants that 1 year deal, but he's probably not going to get a 1 year deal. So maybe he can get a 2 year deal at the max, but the Bulls have made it such that with the contract they offered him, they've made it such that it's going to be very difficult to do that. So the Bulls are playing a funny game with him where, and here's the thing about the Bulls. The Bulls then can lock him down. If he takes the 90 million in 5 years, Bulls lock him down. And then when that new TV deal comes up and all these bigger max contracts start flying all over the place, Jimmy Butler will be kind of a bargain, especially if he maintains the current value. So what the Bulls did by giving him the max offer sheet, it was a very, very smart move. It was a very smart move, especially given what's going to happen to the salary cap. Very intelligent move by Gar forming his job back. As I stated before, Jimmy Butler is about as good as it gets at the shooting guard position. You want this guy. I like what the Bulls did because I like when a player earns his contract and he gets to stay home. What I hope, but at the same time, I want Jimmy to get his money because I always want a guy that's performing to get paid. He deserves it. Let him get his money. Quickly, I'm going to talk about why this is happening and the frame around this. Now, ownership and the media flacks like, people like David Aldridge that just do whatever the NBA tells them to do. They talk about the salary cap as though the salary cap is there to make sure that teams in smaller markets can compete. That is 100% garbage. That's not true. That is not why the salary cap is there. The salary cap is there as an artificial cap on salaries. That's why it's called a salary cap. It's an artificial way of keeping the labor costs down. The NBA also has a max contract, which is another artificial way, non-free market way of making sure people can't get paid what they are really worth. How do I mean? They say, how do you know this? How do you know this, that the salary cap is not there to make sure teams can compete? First of all, nobody wants to win a championship. At any given moment, there's maybe 4 teams in the NBA that are trying to win a title. We've seen Memphis, we've seen Oklahoma City just give players away because they simply don't want to pay them. They don't care about winning a championship. Oklahoma City's trying to win a championship. They gave James Harden away for Kevin Martin and Jeremy Lamb. Come on, man. Come on. Has anybody heard from Kevin Martin since he left Oklahoma City? Kevin Martin is a one-trick pony. Can shoot basketball. Can't do anything else. You traded away James Harden for that. James Harden is going to the Hall. So these teams are clearly not true. They don't care if they would. They in fact, I almost feel like they accidentally have these great teams because they're always in a lottery and they accidentally draft some players. And they're like, oh man, we got to pay all these guys. That's the way they treat it. It's just like the draft. I'll quickly do my draft point. The draft is an outdated thing. It's outdated because the whole point of the draft is so that when amateurs are entering into the pro sphere, that every team or that the worst teams have an opportunity to get the best amateurs. Except they don't do that. They draft guys that have no hope of producing for them. They do that all the time. So we see right now, what did the Knicks do? They draft a guy that has no chance of producing for them. No one on the panel would say, nah, this guy's going to help them. So what do you need a draft for? You might as well just let everybody be a free agent and let people bid on them and get rid of the rookie deal and a rookie cap and all that nonsense. Whatever the guy can get on the open market, that's what capitalism is about. I mean, you don't cap Wall Street guys. You don't say, hey, Mr. Wall Street guy, Mr. Stock trader, investment banker. You don't tell him he has a cap, right? He can make whatever he's worth. Why are basketball players or football players or baseball players any different? Doesn't make sense. Well, actually, baseball players aren't like that. It's for some reason, it's only basketball and football, I guess, right? So to get back to the salary cap, for the salary cap, if this wasn't about just keeping the salaries down, if the salary cap wasn't about that, then there would be this big pool of revenue that the players get a percentage of. And your contract would count against the cap. So let's say you were $8 million a year guy. That counts against the cap. When that remaining money came in, all players would get an equal percentage of that. So you might have some guys in a great year. You might have some guys that, maybe he's a league minimum guy. He's making around $400K. He gets an extra $500,000. Who knows, right? But they're not going to do that because the whole point was just to keep the money down. The point wasn't to make sure that lower market teams could compete. The lower market teams don't want to compete. And part of the reason is because there's so much money that they share from merchandising, that big giant TV contract. Nobody cares about packing a house and filling a stadium. Nobody even cares about that anymore. Because that's not how you make your money. You're making your money with the merchandising, TV deals, etc. That's how you're making your money. So all of this salary cap stuff is all, and this will be addressed in the next collective bargaining agreement. I mean, I doubt seriously they're going to remove the cap or any of that sort of thing. But next time you're watching a movie and whatever star is up there that's overpaid and making a bunch of money, and no one questions that, or you think about the richest people in the world, richest people in the country, executives, for Fortune 500 companies, hedge fund managers, guys like that, they're making all this money, and somehow their income, sky's the limit. Whatever they're worth, they can make. But then, your favorite star in the NBA, you're watching him run up and down the court, bleeding and breaking his body all up, for your entertainment. That guy, for some reason, his income is capped. And it's nonsense. This isn't the crime of the century or anything, but it is nonsense, and there's no excuse for it. These are insanely profitable companies. And finally, I'll say this for all the people out there. Oh, well, the owner owns it, so the owner. Look, man, this is not the old days, man. This is not the old founding days of the NFL. And George Halas is sitting there. He owns the team and coaches it, and he bought the team for $1 from this guy and built it up into this, the NFL, into what we see today. Oh, no. These guys are just some lucky billionaire somewhere that bought the team for their entertainment. They didn't build that organization into anything. It's just some guy that's using it as a toy. This guy didn't have anything to do. Look who owns the Clippers now, Steve. Donald Sterling did everything he could to destroy the Clippers. They luck up because of the collective bargaining agreement. Kenny Smith did a great job of explaining this one day on TNT. They had to spend, because of the collective bargaining agreement, you had to spend a certain percentage of your revenue. There's also a salary limit. So they ended up having to keep some players, and they end up with a good team. And then he ends up having to sell the team, makes billions of dollars. This Steve Ballmer guy owns the team. Why should he necessarily get paid more than Blake Griffin? Blake Griffin has far more to do with the team's success than he does. Ballmer's not doing anything but standing in the stands, waving his arms like a crazy person. He didn't do anything at all to build that team into being anything. Nothing. And almost none of the owners, I think the last owner like that was the late Jerry Buss out of LA, was the last owner that was really a part of building an organization. Um, to have guys, to have all these players where they're making paltry money compared to the executives and the owners, it's just a silly thing that we accept. And I don't know why everybody accepts it and just says, and then has the nerve to act like the players are greedy because they're trying to get market value. It's very, very weird to me. And that's my thoughts on that. I always sign on people being able to get paid what they're worth. And what your worth is what somebody's willing to pay. You're not worth some arbitrary you know ceiling that's put on your some arbitrary ceiling that's put on your income. You're worth what you're worth, the highest amount you can get on the open market is. So that's Danny Ferry, that's Jimmy Butler, that's the salary cap. This was a quick one. We'll be back. We'll be back soon. We have a lot of stuff planned for the off season for the summer. We're gonna do all of our All NBA teams. We're gonna rank we're gonna rank every position. That's the 1 through the 5. Point guard through center. We're going to do some specials too. We got a plan. We got one plan on Scottie Pippen. So that one's coming up. I'm really excited about that because you don't hear enough about great, the original point forward Scottie Pippen. So there's a lot of stuff planned. Stay with the Senior Basketball Analyst. We're not going to let you down. We're going to keep giving you stuff. Give it